Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Four Direction. My name is Mary Apollo. I'm the host for today's show. So today we are going to talk about career and foreign policy, and also how young people can get a job in international diplomacy and the opportunity that this generation have. So I'm joined by Ambassador Tatiana Gfoeller. Welcome, Ambassador, to the Four Direction.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
So Ambassador Tatiana was the former president for AWIU, American Women for Understanding, and she also was the U.S. ambassador to Kazakhstan in 2008. She's the former political advisor to the U.S. Joint Chief of Staff in the Pentagon from 2011 to 2017. So, Ambassador, serving 33 years in foreign policy, how does that feel like today?
Feels good. To be the representative of the American people, of any people that you are the representative of, is a great honor. Obviously, there were challenges along my way. I won't try to gloss them over. Including gender challenges. But basically, I don't regret a day of my life in doing what I did, in serving my country, and in meeting so many new cultures abroad where I was stationed, and treating them, I try to believe, with great respect and with great interest, because you cannot be a State Department official, which I like to jokingly say is half spy and half propagandist, because you're gathering information on the country you're stationed to, right? And you're saying it to the State Department, but you're also so you're being kind of a spy, but in the open, not like real spies are. But you're also telling America's story. So you're being a propagandist, because you're telling America's story, obviously, from a rosy point of view. You're not talking about America's flaws. You're talking about America's strengths. So you're a combination of spy and propagandist, and I enjoyed it thoroughly.
So just take you back to your early inspiration. You have studied art, and also you have a master in science, and then you did the law. You studied law in the University of Florence, and the science in the University of Georgetown. Just talk to me briefly about your early inspiration to foreign policy. How does it start, and also the foreign policy and storytelling. How was that look in your childhood?
Well, I had a brilliant professor of what was then called social sciences. I don't know what it's called now. When I was 10 years old. So I was barely in middle school. And he gave us an assignment. He said, follow one profession for one day, and then give me a report on that profession. And I knew that my father, who was a single father bringing me up, he was a professor and he hated his job. There were so many blades in his back from his colleagues. Every night we would have dinner together and he would tell me about his, bleeding in his back. So I knew I didn't want to be a professor. So I said, Papa, what kind of profession do you think I should, follow for a day? And remember, I'm 10 years old at the time. And my father was very, shall we say, cosmopolitan. And he was friends in my hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, with the 3 consuls general that were then there. The consuls general of Germany, France, and Mexico. and they were good friends. And they allowed me actually to spend several hours with each of them during this one day that I was following them around. And the only time I got into trouble was because I was 10 years old. And I said to the Consul General of France, "How much do they pay you?" And he said, "That is a horrible question. You should never ask anyone that question." So I got into a little trouble with that. But I also took, a lot of notes. And I was able to present, I believe, a pretty good report, for a 10-year-old, on what diplomatic life is like, based on obviously the consular corps. And I fell in love with it. And from 10 years old on, this was way before the time of the internet, of much more accessible research. I started doing research on what university would provide me the tools to pass the Foreign Service exam, which is a very, very difficult exam. And I knew that. So I find out that Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service literally teaches you to pass that exam. Unfortunately, they have one lacuna in their specifications, which is they do not teach you about American arts and music. They only teach you about economics and foreign policy. So I passed the exam the first time I took it while I was still studying. But the way the Foreign Service exam works is you can pass it but not get a job, because they'll tell you you passed it, but the first time I took it, it was 20,000 individuals taking the exam from all over the United States, and they only needed 200. So I was not in the top 200 because I had not done well on arts and music. So I didn't get a job. So I realized what my failure was, and I started self-teaching myself our American arts and music.
So,
I took it again.
Ambassador, I have a question here. Why are they teaching American art and music culture in the international diplomacy curriculum? Why is that important?
Well, because the Foreign Service appears to be monolithic. We call it's the State Department and everybody's a diplomat, etc. But it's actually, when you're inside the Foreign Service, you know that it's 5 cones. We call them cones. The British, by the way, Foreign Ministry has a similar system. They call it streams. But it's specialties. So the top, I hate to say it, but it's the truth, because 90% of all ambassadors come from that cone, is political cone. Political cone does treaties, what you would call traditional diplomacy. The economic cone, which comes right next to it, also does treaties, but about economics. And then you have public diplomacy, where you're supposed to tell America's story. And if you don't know, for example, about New Orleans jazz, you're not going to be good. Or if you don't know about Jackson Pollock, you're not going to be good at telling America's story, right? And then you have management cone, which means organizing the finances, administering basically the embassies. And then you have what is technically not considered diplomacy, which is the consular cone, because consular officers, who predate, by the way, diplomats in the United States system, they're older. Our very first officer, who was deputized abroad right after our independence, went to Morocco as a consular officer. But the consular cone has different immunities and different responsibilities.
So also, I want to go to the importance of studying languages in foreign policy. You speak Russian, French, Polish, Italy, and Spanish, and also Arabic. So, what is the when is the part of the learning a language important in foreign policy, and how did you start it earlier in your career?
I think it's crucial. I think that, you know, the ancient biblical story of the Tower of Babel, where before people became too uppity and God broke us up into different languages, we all spoke each other's languages. Mm-hmm. I believe in that in a cosmic sort of way. I think fundamentally we all speak each other's languages in our hearts, mm-hmm. but we don't listen to that. Mm-hmm. When you learn a new language, it's not just about learning the new culture. It's about learning more about yourself. Every language I've ever learned, I learned more about myself. I discovered parts of myself that I hadn't known about. At the same time, of course, it provides you a great tool as a diplomat, because you're able to talk to your counterparts in the country that you're stationed in with much more empathy. You're not using a translator. You're actually talking from your heart. And that's how I've always practiced diplomacy, is from my heart. I find that it's the most productive way. Mm-hmm. You know, I've delivered demarches. You know, I've talked to my talking points. Of course I have. But the real diplomacy I have found is from the heart.
Okay. So you also talk about the heart and how people communicate in different culture. You work also in different culture. You were the previous foreign policy in Poland, and also you serve as a deputy principal officer in Russia and deputy chief of mission in Turkmenistan, and just deputy principal also in Russia. And recently, you were the consul general in Saudi Arabia, Jeddah. So how does it work in different countries that have different cultural background? How did you adjust with the culture to get immersed in these different cultures?
Well, I have a couple of anecdotes that I like to tell. My very first posting was in Warsaw, Poland. It was still under communism. And I was 24 years old, but I looked like I was about 16 because I was very skinny. And the ambassador at the time called me into his office and he said, I have the secret correspondence with the leader of Solidarity, Lech Wałęsa. But I can't send it by mail, obviously. So you look like the least possible diplomat on my staff. Like, no one will believe you're a diplomat because you look about 16. So I want you to take the train twice a month and carry my secret correspondence and then bring me back the secret replies, because Lech Wałęsa at that time was under house arrest. And we got along so well with Lech Wałęsa, that he invited me to his birthday party. It was great. It was like an underground birthday party. And then my second anecdote is from my second posting when I was a little bit older, and I was quite pregnant. And my job was much more open. I would just go to the foreign ministry and deliver official documents. And during the month of Ramadan, at that time in Saudi Arabia, no man could see a woman unless she was his mother, one of his wives. They could have up to 4 wives, or his sisters. So I said to my counterpart, I'm out of a job. How can I deliver my official documents to you when you cannot see me? And he said, it's not a problem. We'll give you a document that says you're an official man. And they did. then I would go into the foreign ministry. I would show the document that I'm an official man. And a lot of the guys already knew me anyway, and they knew the story that I was an official man. So they were completely relaxed. But occasionally I'd run into some other foreign ministry official who did not know that I was an official man. And they would get really scared because they had committed the sin of seeing this woman who was not related to them. Because I'm a nice girl, I would always show them the document and I would say, don't worry, I'm an official man. And they would all say, wow, that's wonderful. Thank goodness you're an official man. I did not commit a sin. So that taught me a lot about
how does it feel
gender works.
How does it feel today when you compare to your time? You were a woman in the foreign policy, and today, if you walk up in a room where there is young girls also in the same field, there is any different on that?
You know, good question. I'm in touch with a lot of young State Department women who've just entered the State Department, and men, of course, as well, but mainly young women. And when I first entered the State Department, and that was in 1984, so I entered the State Department's educational program, you know, where they teach you how to be a diplomat. And being myself, I raised my hand and I asked a question, and I said, what are the chances of a foreign service officer like myself to become an ambassador? Which of course, eventually I did. And I was told 4%. Because of course, most ambassadorships are handed out to political appointees. So for a career person, like a foreign service officer like myself, it's extraordinarily difficult. So being, again, myself, I said, how about as a woman foreign service officer? What are my chances? And they told me 1.5%. That's out of 4%, right? So recently I was chatting with a group of young incoming foreign service officers. And I asked them, did you ever ask that question? And they said, yes, of course. And I said, what was the answer? And they said, 4%. And I said, okay. So nothing has changed in about 35 years. But let me ask you the following question. Did you ask, as a female foreign service officer, what are your chances? And they said yes. And the answer is 1.9%. So in 35 years, women have gone from 1.5 to 1.9%. But the percentage of foreign service officers who become ambassadors has stayed the same. 4%.
So also, yeah, in your role, the former political advisor to the U.S. Joint Chief of Staff in the Pentagon from 2011 to 17. Yeah, so I saw some pictures that you had. You're working with the foreign policy advisor to the Army, Frank Grass. So how was that experience like for you? Some of the achievements, some of the challenges that you faced during that time, and you were able to overcome it?
Well, the Pentagon is a different country, but 33 years in the State Department, you know, prepares you to go to a different country. My father always had this wonderful statement to me. In every person, look for that little piece of God in them. And then focus on that piece of God and you will do okay. And I followed that advice during all of my years abroad. And then when I ended up at the Pentagon, I felt I was abroad again because the culture is completely different from the State Department, or frankly from, usual civilian culture.
So when you said
But
culture, what do you mean by that? Like the culture is different in the Pentagon?
It's extraordinarily hierarchical.
Oh.
I mean, I was rotated among the chiefs of staff, like who was my main client, so to speak, that I would advise. And one of my clients, and I don't want to divulge anything, he had 3 waiting rooms. 3. So if I had an appointment with him, like at noon, I would have to arrive at 11:30 and then sit in one waiting room. And then I would be allowed into the next waiting room. And then I would be allowed into the third waiting room. And finally, I'd be allowed into his office. So I learned that, you just have to get there early. So it's hugely hierarchical. Now, because I was an ambassador, so the equivalent of a general, I was given as aide always a full colonel. And the colonel was like so differential to me. And whatever colonel, I had 3 colonels in a row. And I would say, hey, can't we just be friends, And they're like, no, ma'am. You're the ambassador. We can't be friends. So it's different in that sense that, in most American society, we are much more open. But in the military, and my son, by the way, is an active military officer, so I certainly don't want to say anything negative about the military, but it is incredibly hierarchical. And I had to learn how to deal with that. But the good news is that the military, the US military, is not racist, and it's gender neutral. I mean, if you're a general, they don't care what color you are, they don't care what gender you are. It's only the stars on your shoulder.
Okay. So just like recently, if you were today in the Pentagon and they bring for you one of the recent conflict to solve or to give an advice on, what is that advice will be like?
Well, it depends on the question, of course.
Yeah, like I just want to check you, like recently serving earlier in Russia, that the time when you were serving in Russia today, do you see any political changes, any cultural changes?
Well, if you bring up Russia, I mean, for good or bad reasons, and I'm not going to judge, the United States has basically denuclearized to a vast degree its nuclear arsenal. It has decreased its nuclear arsenal vastly. Russia, in the meantime, has been increasing its nuclear arsenal. Russia is now by far the largest nuclear power in the world. And Russia has always stated as part of its nuclear doctrine that it will use nuclear arms first, if needed, for its protection, whereas the United States always said that we would use our nuclear arms only in retaliation. So this is a big difference. So at this point, now that we are basically nuclearly relatively weak, relatively to Russia, not relatively to, Bolivia, but relatively to Russia, we are weak. I would advise anyone who is inclined to have a war with Russia to be very, very careful, because they've always said the nuclear pistol is on the table. We can act first, and they might. And I live in Washington, D.C., and right now I'm preparing my exit to my second home in Miami, because the Russians, if angry enough, they will not futz around. They will not attack, Portland, Maine. They will attack Washington, D.C. and New York City for sure. And then they may go for the West Coast, Los Angeles. I'm hoping that Miami is safe, because Miami is just a port city. It's not really significant in any defense kind of way. All Miami does is have huge boats that come in with lots of stuff.
How can everyone make sure, like, the citizens who are here, the life of the citizen are safe, like that are protected?
It's very hard to tell. There seems to be almost a media embargo right now going on, because I watch the media like on an hourly basis. English language media, Russian language media, everything I can. Some of the best media is coming out of India, which is interesting, because they seem to be the least biased. They're just looking at the situation. I mean, they have been long-term, of course, allies of Russia, but they're also quite objective. So I find the best information I can get right now is from the blogosphere of India. But it changes every day. It changes, like who's giving the truth.
Do you think that the media have done a good coverage on this case of Russia?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that whatever we get is completely biased. It's basically the talking points from Ukraine that the American media is just repeating and repeating. But what's really weird is I can speak Ukrainian, I can read Ukrainian. What's really weird is when I try to get into Ukrainian media, I can't even get into it. So, the only other media I can get to that is close to Ukraine is Polish. I also speak Polish, of course. But the Poles are, again, they're like super biased. So it's very hard to get a real idea of what's going on.
So how is this conflict going to look in the future? In the long-term future or the short one?
I think it's going to, I hope it's not going to turn into a nuclear war. I think it could. Because at a certain point, countries have red lines. And for Russia, this is not an invasion of Ukraine. This is the reunification of their homeland. Because if you look in the past, the name of Russia was Kiev and Rus. Kiev, Rus. That's Kiev is where Russia got its start. And then, of course, many years later, Joseph Stalin, who is guilty of a myriad human rights abuses, he carved out, present day Ukraine out of Western Ukraine, which was historically part of Poland and was Catholic, and spoke a different dialect. And then Eastern Ukraine, including Kiev, which was Orthodox and spoke Russian. And he made them together because he wanted them to fight each other so they could not fight Moscow.
Mhm.
And when I was working for many years, traveling throughout Africa, I saw the same thing, that the British mainly and the French, they would create these artificial countries or colonies at that time
Mhm.
of tribes that hated each other because they wanted the people to hate each other so they wouldn't hate the colonial power. So
Mhm.
this is a tried and true experiment where you put people together who don't belong together. So they're fighting each other, but they are not strong enough to fight
So,
you.
so do you think that these countries, Russia and Ukraine, in a need of a new leader to be in power?
Well, I think that there should be a velvet divorce. I mean, Czechoslovakia was the wisest of the countries of the former Soviet Union. They said to each other, the Czechs and the Slovaks, they said, you know, we hate you. We really hate you, but we don't want to kill you. We just want to create two new countries. And they negotiated very peacefully. You know, nobody was killed. And now we have two countries that I believe are much happier by being apart. You know, the Czechs are the Czechs and the Slovaks are the Slovaks. So what my prescription, so to speak, for Ukraine would be, go back to where you were. Western Ukraine is Western. So create your own state. And Eastern Ukraine is basically Russian. Or, you know, you can call it whatever you want, but Russian inspired. Create your own state. Just don't kill each other. That's what hurts me so much, because I used to go to Ukraine all the time as when I was a diplomat. I know the Western Ukraine, I know Eastern Ukraine. I was stationed in Moscow. We didn't have an embassy at the time in Ukraine. I went there all the time. It hurts me to see the pain.
So actually, countries, Russia and Ukraine, in a need of a new leader to be in power?
Well, I think that there should be a velvet divorce. I mean, Czechoslovakia was the wisest of the countries of the former Soviet Union. They said to each other, the Czechs and the Slovaks, they said, you know, we hate you. We really hate you, but we don't want to kill you. We just want to create two new countries. And they negotiated very peacefully. You know, nobody was killed. And now we have two countries that I believe are much happier by being apart. You know, the Czechs are the Czechs and the Slovaks are the Slovaks. So what my prescription, so to speak, for Ukraine would be, go back to where you were. Western Ukraine is Western. So create your own state. And Eastern Ukraine is basically Russian. Or, you know, you can call it whatever you want, but Russian inspired. Create your own state. Just don't kill each other. That's what hurts me so much, because I used to go to Ukraine all the time as when I was a diplomat. I know the Western Ukraine, I know Eastern Ukraine. I was stationed in Moscow. We didn't have an embassy at the time in Ukraine. I went there all the time. It hurts me to see the pain.
So actually, I want to ask you, part of the work that you were doing for supporting young women. You were recently you were the AWIU, American War for Understanding Presidents. So what is your vision on supporting women in general, and why is it important for you in foreign service, especially?
Oh, well, it's crucial. It's absolutely crucial.
I'm going to the subject.
There's so many reasons. So many reasons. It'll be hard for me to tell all of them, but just randomly, okay? Our planet is suffering from overpopulation. The one key tool against overpopulation is educating women. When women get an education, they usually choose to have 2 children, sometimes a bit more, but not that more. And they are able to tell their husband or boyfriend or whatever, you know, enough is enough. They're able to take control of their bodies. And that's important for the economy of the globe. That's really important, because the more we overpopulate the globe, the more we create poverty. I mean, it's a paradox that, you know, really good-minded Western people came into Africa. They gave out all these malaria drugs. So people aren't dying from malaria anymore, but they have no jobs. They're starving. I mean, you have to have a population that can support itself through work, as opposed to them, you know, starving. So that's like the basic, you know.
Okay. So
women have to be able to control their bodies.
okay.
Right?
Yeah, so I'm going just for you quick, if you can talk to us quickly about the exams of the Foreign Service and also the curriculum and your book, The U.S. Foreign Policy Interest in the Capuchin Peasant. And do you have any book that is coming recently?
Okay, so on the Foreign Service exam, like I mentioned earlier, there's actually 5 exams, even though they're bundled into one, and you're not told that it's 5 exams, which I think is a little bit unfair, but it takes the whole written exam takes an entire day. It's exhausting. And you have these questions randomly.
What?
But they measure you, you know, for example, did you do well on the political side? Did you do well on the economic side?
I have like 1 minute left. I want to ask you mostly about the book, and if you have upcoming book, and also you wrote before The Simple Love. So my last question just will be, with your writing, what is the upcoming step? And do you think that there will be an upcoming woman in leadership?
So I wrote a book about foreign affairs, United by the Caspian. And recently I published a romance novel called A Simple Love. It's on Amazon.com. And I'm working now on a second novel, and it's very, very dark. It's my father, who was also a novelist, told me, let the characters take you where they want.
Okay.
And my characters are taking me into a very dark place, but
okay,
it's okay.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Ambassador Tatiana Gfoeller. I think we are expecting more from you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for watching The 4 Direction. This was Ambassador Tatiana Gfoeller. She's the former U.S. ambassador to Kazakhstan, and she held a different position in the U.S. Foreign Service. See you again in a different episode. Have a good day. Bye.